drone, bro.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
My gosh.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
Look at that thing, dude.
That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not.
That is the LNS, dude.
Well, if there's like...
Look at that thing.
It's rotating.
To this day, people from all over the world claim to witness aerial phenomena that defy the current laws of physics as we know them, with reports ranging in the tens of millions since the 1940s. Descriptions of aerial craft spanning a vast array of shapes and sizes, as well as the peculiar and diverse species of occupants who accompany them. UFO reports have been collected, researched, and documented for decades. For the most part, if we are to believe the findings of the U.S. government's own investigation into UFOs through its program Project Blue Book, then a vast percentage of cases have a very rational explanation behind them. The misidentification of airplanes, planets, and strange weather anomalies, to name a few. However, a large number of cases remain that simply cannot be explained away. Especially when considering the countless testimonies from such highly credible witnesses as commercial airline and military pilots, police officials, and first responders. In addition, are the mounting files of declassified documents, video and photographic images, and even physical evidence collected to substantiate their claims. As years go by, it is obvious that UFO sightings have not ceased. To the contrary, sightings throughout the world are continuing more than ever. What is categorically undeniable is that people are truly experiencing phenomena that are very real, and that the origins of this phenomenon may very well be from another world. And we may discover the truth sooner than later, as the hint of disclosure is slowly coming forth to the public. In fact, at the time of producing this documentary, more information on the topic of UFOs is gradually being released to the New York Times from the Pentagon on an almost daily basis. But if this is the case, that a full disclosure of the government's knowledge and involvement into the matter of UFOs be imminent, then why the grounds for secrecy in the first place? And what becomes of the legacies of those who previously came forth, only to have their lives destroyed by ridicule, harassment, and in some cases, death? The unbelievable possibility of our planet being visited by otherworldly beings is groundbreaking, historic in epic proportions, and nonetheless, very real. Yet what is even more unbelievable is the inconceivable notion that the citizens of planet Earth have been denied the truth that visitations of extraterrestrials to our planet exists. Why? Why may the single most significant discovery in humankind be kept a secret under a veil of mystery, murder, intrigue, and national security? Is there one single person, or group for that matter, who possess all knowledge of the existence of extraterrestrials and their visitations to Earth? What is the truth? Why keep it secret? And most importantly, who's in charge?
Good evening, my fellow Americans. First, I should like to express my gratitude to the radio and television.
At the end of Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidency, having fulfilled 2 successful terms as Commander-in-Chief of perhaps the greatest military power on Earth, his farewell address to the nation sounds more like a warning than that of a goodbye.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Could it be that this great power that he termed the military-industrial complex eventually becomes so powerful that perhaps one day even its very own leaders could be phased out? Was this a warning that the fate of future presidents will find themselves helpless against controlling what actions, advancements, and procedures are underway within the military-industrial complex under the guise of black ops? Or was he ominously stating that it had already begun? If this is so, how did this happen? When? And who is now pulling the strings? The answers lay within a vast and tangled web, where no single person controls everything. Wrapped in a weave of secret projects and black operations resides the military-industrial complex. There, you will find government, military, and private sector companies working, though not always together. They set their own agendas, their own hours of operation, their own policies, and most disturbing, their own laws. Their specialties range from photographic, metallurgy, and propulsion research to highly advanced weaponry and aerospace technology. In fact, the 1950s saw an amazing surge of advancements in weapons and aerospace technology under the operations of the military-industrial complex. Yet it is impossible to also overlook the fact that the 1950s saw its greatest surge in UFO activity as well. Some will argue that this was the most significant era for UFO sightings. Just 4 months prior to Eisenhower's election, the news outlets were filled with headlines that UFOs had been seen flying over Washington, D.C. in what appeared to be a massive wave of sightings that lasted for several days. Was this a message? A warning? According to the Air Force, and despite radar, eyewitnesses, and even photographic evidence, the official conclusion was that it was all a glitch in the radar, a mirage caused by temperature inversions. This event did, however, lead to the formation of a scientific examination on just what UFOs were and their effect on the American people. This was known as the Robertson Panel. In the first half of 1952, during the span of several months, reports of unidentified flying objects were coming in at an alarming rate, while at the same time, U.S. relations with the Soviet Union were continuing to deteriorate. The Cold War had been well underway for at least 7 years, and communism posed a serious threat to national security. With looming concerns and anxieties on the rise from both the American citizens and within the U.S. government, this new idea of facing a possible second threat from some unknown enemy of an unknown origin entering our airspace became much to worry about. It was still unclear as to the origins of the strange objects, now seen throughout the world, and speculations began to arise. Were they from another country? Could they be advanced German technology, perhaps from relocated and newly formed, hidden Nazi bases, maybe in South America? Some believed that these objects came from the center of the Earth, while others theorized that they were time travelers from other dimensions. But of all the speculation, the most popular theory as to where UFOs came from was that of another world. And if this were true, then the technology that UFOs possess would be far superior to anything we would have here on Earth. And if their technology were as advanced as many believe it to be, then how further advanced were their weapons? As early as 1947, the U.S. felt it necessary to begin investigating these matters under the code names of Project Sign and later Project Grudge. Then in April of 1952, in an effort to ensure the public that their skies were indeed safe and secure, Project Grudge was changed once more and became what is now known as Project Blue Book. But Project Blue Book was a very low-level operation with a minuscule budget and staff. It appeared as though right out of the gate, Project Blue Book was not about taking the UFO phenomena seriously.
I'm here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States.
But it seems that after the wave of sightings that occurred over the skies of our nation's capital in July of 1952, UFOs would, in fact, need a more stringent look that went far beyond the capacity of Project Blue Book. It was then Director of Intelligence, General Walter Beetle Smith, who issued a directive in the fall of 1952 to conduct a massive inquiry into the study of UFOs, their origins, and their intentions. This group would later assemble for a 3-day review in January of 1953 and would be known as the Robertson Panel. The purpose of the Robertson Panel would be to get to the bottom of just what people were seeing in the skies overhead and to ease any growing public hysteria. Another matter of concern was what would happen if such technology wound up in the wrong hands. This would be a matter for the Office of Scientific Investigations, the OSI, to once and for all conduct a serious and scientific study into the UFO phenomena. Their findings were neither serious nor scientific, concluding that there was little to nothing of scientific value in UFO reports, and that there was no evidence of a direct threat to national security, despite credible testimonies and the fact that some UFO sightings had been seen within the borders of highly sensitive military installations. The Robertson Panel even went so far as to make researching UFOs itself a mockery. And this has led to decades of significant UFO reports continuing to rise, while very little interest is given from the scientific community. In its findings, we also begin to see the beginnings
of the U.S. government collaborating with companies within the private sector, such as the Battelle Memorial Institute, a non-profit applied science and technology company that happens to have a vast expertise in metallurgy, the science behind the properties of common and exotic metals. One thing is certain, though it did not solve or attempt to research the topic of UFOs any further, it did achieve one of its major directives. It put an end to any growing public hysteria. If UFOs could so easily be explained from as far back as the early 1950s, then why the continued need of secrecy for the past 70 years? Many people believe a massive cover-up has been underway since 1947, when news reports of a crashed disc recovered in Roswell, New Mexico, made headlines throughout the world, and that the government knows much more than what it wants to share with the public. But what do they know? And what if the many documents that have surfaced over the past 40 years are true? Such as the 1952 briefing documents to then-President-elect Eisenhower regarding a mysterious group known as MJ-12. On the morning of Tuesday, November 18, 1952, it is believed that a set of documents crossed the desk of President-elect Eisenhower that are unlike anything he has ever seen before. At first glance, they appear to be typical top-secret documents, the kind he has grown accustomed to reading. But upon further inspection, it soon becomes evident that within these papers lay information that will not only alter the fate of the planet, but of the solar system and perhaps the universe itself. These are the MJ-12 documents. And if we are to assume the story is accurate and that these papers are authentic, as some believe them to be, then they could very well be one of the most significant smoking guns regarding the government's direct involvement into the study of UFOs and life on other planets as we know it. And it is from these documents that Eisenhower will learn of a secret group of men assigned by then-President Harry S. Truman with the specific duties of researching, studying, collecting, and reporting directly to the President all findings regarding the recent discovery of extraterrestrials and their mission here on Earth. The group will be known as the Majestic 12. Could the MJ-12 documents be real? One thing seems certain. For as much information as they seem to provide, there is still much more information that is left out. But that should not dismiss the fact that throughout the 1950s, during the majority of Eisenhower's term, our interest in UFOs, science, and developments in space and weapons technology grew more than in any other period in time. Is there also any truth to the stories that Eisenhower possibly knew more about UFOs than any other president before or since? And there are some startling revelations that suggest that the president himself had his own personal encounters with UFOs and their occupants. With regards to secret military projects, black operations, conspiracies, and UFOs, the first question that always comes to mind is, just how much does the president know? And from where or whom does he get his information? Is it the CIA? The Joint Chiefs, the FBI? Or could it be the Office of Naval Intelligence? Today, with so many different agencies, it is very easy to understand how, through compartmentalization, the idea of one single agency
or group of people knowing everything on a single topic is virtually impossible, let alone a topic as vast and as fragmented as UFOs. But in the 1950s, was it possible that Eisenhower knew much more at that time than any other president since? And what about the countless rumors that for decades have claimed Eisenhower allegedly had his own personal encounters with UFOs? One mysterious event took place while the president was relaxing at the sprawling 400-acre Smoke Tree Ranch in Palm Springs, California, on February 20th, 1954. On this particular evening, the president simply vanished, and for a span of several hours was nowhere to be found. His disappearance was troubling enough that the Associated Press went as far as to release a statement that Eisenhower had died of a heart attack. The following morning, it was made clear that the president had simply broken a tooth and that an emergency trip to the dentist had been arranged. This explanation seems to have settled the press, although others believe that the visit to the dentist office was nothing more than a cover story for what really happened on that February night in 1954. According to some, late that evening, the president was quietly escorted out of the Smoke Tree Ranch residence in Palm Springs and taken in an unmarked car, whereby he was either flown or driven to an undisclosed location at what was then Muroc Air Force Base, now known as Edwards Air Force Base. Once there, it is said that Eisenhower witnessed flying discs performing unbelievable feats of aerial maneuvers and then was given a VIP invitation, not only to go inside an alien craft, but to meet with the extraterrestrials themselves. Palm Springs to Muroc Air Force Base was a distance of roughly 110 miles, and many researchers believe this event could not have happened, given that, in order to make a drive of that distance, Eisenhower would have been in a car for a total of 5 hours that night, and still need to be ready and alert for his early morning activities, which included a church service. Yet had he simply flown directly from Palm Springs to Muroc, the flight would have been less than 20 minutes, making the events of that evening plausible and possible. Unfortunately, there are no records of the event ever taking place. But if a meeting had occurred, what would have been discussed? One can only speculate. But one likely reason for a meeting could have been to discuss the growing concern of our most recent and deadly advancement. By the early 1950s, the United States alone had detonated well over 60 atomic devices, and with each new weapon came better technology to make them more accurate and far more deadly. An everlasting testament to the growing power of the United States military. As it so happened, along with the surge in nuclear testing throughout the planet, so too began an influx in UFO activity. Could this be classified as a mere coincidence? Not if you consider the possibility that mankind's first foray into the atomic age sent a shockwave throughout the cosmos that could have been felt by other more intelligent beings in the universe. And, as if it were a beacon, the infant civilization of Earth was now declaring that it had taken its seat at the grown-up table. But was such a bold statement rightfully earned? There is the more disconcerting idea that we had now possessed a power far beyond our understanding, and with great and dire consequences if used improperly. Had extraterrestrials been watching us the whole time? Patiently observing from the outskirts of Earth's orbit, like an overprotective parent with a child just out of reach, yet always keeping a sharp, keen eye out. It is unclear as to any validation to support the 1954 encounter ever happened between Eisenhower and aliens. But a more feasible encounter may in fact have taken place just 1 year later at Holloman Air Force Base in 1955. It is rumored that during these meetings, an agreement was made between the United States and the extraterrestrials. A treaty of sorts that not only may have involved an interplanetary exchange program between Earthlings and extraterrestrials, but would also grant our planet the aid of advanced alien technology to use for the betterment of our society. In return, the U.S. government would put a cease on all nuclear weapons. Whether true or not, it is evident that our world's leaders have not held up their end of the bargain, and in doing so, the United States alone have tested over 1,030 nuclear bombs, bringing the world's total to 2,056 by the year 2017. Yet through all of this, one thing remains undeniable. It was during this period in time that our quest for the stars became a reality. It also saw the beginning of a more elaborate means for the need of secrecy. In the inner sanctum of the Nellis Air Force Range is a secret base that, until recently, the government denied it ever existed.
The story of Area 51 started out simple enough, as a natural dry lake bed. But in 1955, the isolated region and its surrounding mountain range became the choice location for building a facility designated to test the military's latest secret, the U-2 spy plane. The flat surface of land provided the perfect location for an extremely long landing strip. And as the facility grew, it became home to even more secret military aircraft, much to the dismay of Eisenhower, who only grew more frustrated as each new project was approved without his knowledge. Rumor has it that he became enraged when he first discovered the existence of a particular project by learning about it in, of all places, a popular magazine article. It became clear that the President of the United States, once a 5-star Army general, was no longer privy to the nation's most sensitive operations within the military-industrial complex. And if Eisenhower was not calling the shots, who were? It is possible that Area 51, as well as its surrounding facilities, are leased out by the Air Force to private companies, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, EG&G, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman, to name a few. Companies that not only had massive defense contracts for the research and development of advanced weapon systems, but as it turned out, in 1955, all specialized in the new and fast-growing field of aerospace. And as time went on, insiders claimed that not just man-made aerospace projects were being conducted within the Groom Lake facility of Area 51. And what may continue to today is a complex system of black projects funded by siphoned-off tax dollars from undisclosed budgets. Secret agreements made between special compartments within the armed forces and high-tech defense contractors in the private sector. This would allow all military and national security measures to be handled with a need-to-know classification, thus giving access to only those working directly on the project, and giving the President and his administration a plausible deniability. The mid-1950s saw a surge in the development of aircraft. Planes went faster, farther, and higher than anything ever before created by man. But just how far
And how high could we really go? Were we now, after centuries of looking to the cosmos with mystery and wonderment, finally ready to take the voyage ourselves in what is undeniably the final frontier?
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
When looking back at history with an open mind, it is easy to start connecting dots to the origins of the space race. In what would seem like a brief span of years between 1944 and 1956, the United States would find itself in a Second World War, the atomic age, the jet age, and even the space age. And it would be foolish not to think UFOs had anything to do with it. The sightings alone, whether true or conceived, were enough to inspire many to believe that something most definitely was out there. The rise of science fiction tales, movies, and the embracing of UFOs, aliens, and Martians by pop culture may have led, if not encouraged, many that if they can come here from other worlds, why can't we go to other worlds from here? The mindset in Washington and Moscow was a bit different. They now saw space as not just a new frontier, but a new battleground. And the lines in the sand were being drawn. Just after the Second World War, plans were underway for a spy satellite project, an idea that could take years to develop. But the concept of putting an object in space was not new. The U.S. had experimented with rocket planes and supersonic aircraft since the mid-1940s. And before that, the Nazis were well underway of developing liquid-propel engines that would be utilized in the creation of their V-2 rockets, a design that would eventually lay the groundwork for the American space program. But it would be the Soviets to succeed in launching Sputnik, the world's first orbital satellite, on October 4th, 1957. Fears began to grow at the thought of a possible Soviet threat lurking directly from above the United States. And 9 months later, Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Act, establishing the country's first official space agency, NASA. Though NASA would see many failures as well as triumphs during its early years, the advancements made and achieved were astounding, especially when given the time frame required, and considering just how recent the concept of air travel itself was. The testing of new and advanced aircraft also helped in squelching many of the reports of UFOs that were still coming in. And while great measures were still taken to ensure the secrecy of extraterrestrials, the U.S. government and even the might of the military-industrial complex were still no match for the surmounting number of sightings witnessed by civilians throughout the world. Skeptics argue that it would have been impossible for anyone to have kept a secret of such magnitude for so long. Yet there were many who, in fact, did come forward and shared vital information from pilots, doctors, military officers, and other highly credible civilians. In doing so, they found themselves subjected to the harshest consequences. job loss, divorce, ridicule, and character assassinations conjured by paid-off investigators and so-called journalists. Many were threatened, and many have died due to very unlikely causes. There is an overwhelming and disturbing list of UFO whistleblowers who have mysteriously died. From bizarre illnesses and fast-spreading cancers, to hit-and-run, drunk driving, and hunting accidents. There seems to be a lot of effort made to harass, threaten, and even assassinate key individuals who claim to have knowledge of something the government says does not exist. Those behind these heinous acts have yet to be held accountable. Perhaps in their defense, it was justified under the grounds of national security. And as Eisenhower sat before the cameras, giving his farewell address to the nation, warning of the growing power of the military-industrial complex, he may have left the presidency a bit encouraged that any needed and necessary change could and would be achieved by his successor.
I consider the Truman-Eisenhower years as the golden years of ufology. Simply, one main reason is there was no email, no internet, and everything was documented on paper. Unfortunately, most of that stuff has remained classified. I spent a lot of time in presidential library archives, and you get on the trail of something really good, and you get to it, and you pull out a sheet that it's been redacted, especially in New Mexico, because that was the hot spot. That's where they were launching V2s and other rockets. They were setting off atomic explosions. And the word was, that I've read, scientists from that time said the appearance of UFOs, or flying saucers as they were called then, became so common that they didn't even pay any attention to them anymore, because they knew when they were going to have a test, they were going to show up. 1947 forward, I mean, there's a lot happening, and Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. But the nuclear test in the New Mexico desert, White Sands, and of course, Roswell happened. I can be a skeptic about some things, but I'm not a skeptic about Roswell at all. I am convinced, absolutely convinced, that Roswell was an extraterrestrial event. Well, that's hard to say. Obviously, when General Beale Smith became director of CIA, he was very close to Eisenhower, as you know, and I would think that Eisenhower got a very, very good briefing at that time. Now, whether he was briefed while he was Supreme Commander during the Second World War, who knows? That's hard to say. And Eisenhower was so touchy about intelligence. He would fire a man, no matter how close he may have been to him, for breaking security. So that's hard to take about Eisenhower, but there's no doubt that he was briefed, And I would think that what you said about Truman, saying that he wanted both candidates to be briefed, is probably accurate. As far as the documents, there are a lot that I'm very skeptical of. I do, however, believe that the Eisenhower briefing document, the Cutler-Twining memo, and the SOM 1-01, I believe those three documents could very well be, I would say probably be authentic. SOM, Special Operations Manual, is a manual, eyes only, top secret, for members of Majestic 12 and whomever they would bring into there. Obviously, it couldn't be just Majestic 12 people. They would have to have other people brought into the loop of knowledge to do whatever they needed them to do. They weren't workers in the field workers themselves, so you had to have field workers. But anyway, this manual told in some depth what you do with when you discover a crash saucer, how you recover it, how you handle civilians that may have seen it, how it's supposed to be taken from the site, if there are beings, how they should be handled. Anyway, it seems to me it was about 38 pages, and it went into some depth, even describing the type of craft they may encounter. The last document was the Eisenhower briefing document, given to Eisenhower by the CIA, and gave him a brief overview of the whole flying saucer UFO issue. So I think those documents have a good chance of being accurate. I guess I'll say I have faith in those three documents. Albert Chopp was in the tower, and he witnessed these happenings. Now, the first weekend, when jet interceptors were called in, they were called in from somewhere in New Jersey. The blips, the targets, took off, vanished. When the jets left, they came back. On the second week, the blips appeared again. Again, jets were called in. When they got there, the blips, the saucers, what have you, didn't leave. And one jet became surrounded, closed in by a number of these objects surrounding the craft. And the pilot really became panicked. He was asking, what am I supposed to do? In other words, am I supposed to shoot at them? He was scared to death, because I'm sure that he knew that if he did something offensive against him, he'd probably be vaporized. Flap over that obviously got to President Truman. He wanted answers, and from his insistence on answers of some sort, which really nobody could give, the Robertson panel came out of that after a major news conference headed up by General Sanford and General Roger Ramey, who was now a four-star general. They made some admission that there were some very strange happenings that people were seeing, but that they were probably caused by temperature inversions. This angered the controllers at Washington National and at Andrews Air Force Base, who was also picking them up on radar. They were incensed that people were being told that as experienced radar operators, they couldn't tell a weather condition from a hard target. 1953, January, 1953. H.B. Robertson headed that committee, and they listened. I think they had 4-day sessions made up of a morning session and an evening session over 4 days. They heard from a representative from the photo interpretation library who had been looking at films taken in Tremonton, Utah by warrant officer, and they studied them for about 1,000 hours. This was a group that was headed by the brilliant Arthur Lundahl, brilliant photo interpretation expert. He was the one that was the major player in the Cuban Missile Crisis, interpreting those films, those photographs. His people went before the panel and said that what was on that film, they were not birds, they were not balloons, they were not airplanes. They were objects that were obviously self-luminous. The panel decided in their final report, which was called the Durant Report, that they appreciated the hard work that the photo interpretation people had put into it, but obviously what was on the film was birds. Now here you had experts in photography, and here you got people that may be PhDs, but they're not photo experts, disagreeing with them and saying they're birds. Well, this has gone on. I mean, the history of the whole UFO story is one cover-up after cover-up. I mean, we've got so many stories we could talk about in that vein. Project Blue Book Special Report 14, that's a story in itself. And the Air Force just flat out lied. That was done. It wasn't publicized. It wasn't done by the Air Force. It was done by Battelle Memorial Institute in Ohio, a very well-respected think tank, which reviewed 3,201 cases, and took them 2 years. And they came out with a report. The then Secretary of the Air Force, Donald Quayles, called a news conference, and he told all the reporters there that their Special Report 14 had come out, and what it said was, in essence, it said a lot of things. It was many, many pages long, and it's available now online. Anybody that wants to look it up can get it online, read the whole thing. It's full of graphs and charts and what have you. But the nuts and bolts are that Donald Quayles, Secretary of the Air Force, told the reporters that he couldn't give them copies of the report because the Air Force just couldn't afford to print it. That was probably true, because I think the report was about 1,000 pages. But he told them what the report said, and in essence it said, out of the 3,201 cases, only 3% could not be identified, and of those 3%, they had the worst witnesses and the least amount of backup. So, in essence, he was saying there's nothing to this. In fact, what the report says, that there were 21.5% that were unidentified, and of that 21.5%, they were made up by the most reliable witnesses and the greatest amount of detail. And that's why I say in a very short few words, the Air Force just told a flat-out lie. The problem I have with that story is he was seen up until 8 p.m. when he had dinner and was supposedly chipped a tooth eating a piece of chicken. There's some people that say, and this story has been around a long time, that he was taken to what was then Muroc, later Edwards, and had a meeting with extraterrestrials. My problem with that, very simply, is I find it a little hard to believe that, first of all, he wasn't seen from 8 o'clock that night until he went to church the next morning, Sunday morning. Well, I don't find it hard to believe at all that the president is in the public view all the time, all night long. I don't see anything unusual about him having to go out somewhere if he did, in fact, chip a tooth. I find it more non-plausible that he slipped away, flew, or was driven to Muroc, which really isn't that far from Palm Springs, probably a 2-hour drive, had a meeting with extraterrestrials, then came back and went to church. That it's the time doesn't work for me, and the subject matter doesn't work for me. Now, I think that's much more believable. You've got several witnesses, reliable witnesses, that say that Eisenhower flew there in his Super Connie. The plane shut down at the end of the main runway, which is very odd in itself, and there was a disc there, a UFO or a flying saucer. Eisenhower got out of the plane, walked across the runway, and got in the saucer. Well, there again, that's stretching believability to me, because I don't think that the Secret Service would allow the President of the United States to get out and walk across and get into a strange spacecraft that they could snap the door shut and take off to goodness knows where. So, but I do think that Eisenhower was there, and I do think that the people, there were a number of people, a fellow named Kirkland, who worked there, that saw or had people tell him about a disc that was there at Edwards, that was in the air, flying there at Edwards. Another fellow that was an electrician, worked on the line, has a recording that I have, that he tells the story of he was up a pole stringing wire along the flight line, and he saw the president's plane land. He couldn't see what it did, but he did see a strange saucer-shaped object that was hovering in the air, to the point that it frightened him so bad that he cut out. He was up a pole with climbers on. He cut out and came down the pole, and the guys laughed at him and said, "You came down that pole faster than a fireman." So it became the fireman story in his family. Anyway, I think that that probably has areas of truth in it. It's a secure base, obviously. I mean, a jackrabbit doesn't cross the perimeter without the people there knowing about it. So people are not going to get in that base. I mean, the stories about what happens to you if you even go near the boundary of public land to government land. If you get too close, they'll come out and shoo you away. And they do say that they'll use deadly force. That's what the signs say. It would certainly be a very good place to take UFOs and to test them. I don't know. There's another place that I favor a little more than Area 51, and that's Dugway Proving Grounds. Dugway is 800, probably now it's probably 1,000 acres of well-guarded land, as well as Area 51, maybe better. So that's another likely place, and it could very well be. And you know, we're all dealing in an area where there's a great deal of speculation because we don't have many facts. So you have to speculate, but Dugway is secure. It could very well be that Area 51 is being used by the government as a decoy, making everybody interested in that and really have the captured debris or crafts, if you will, in another location. So, I mean, that would make sense. The government's very good at disinformation. Eisenhower was being prodded by his military people to go ahead and put up a satellite. They were telling him, we've got the capability to do it. Our rockets are not as reliable as we'd like to be. We may have some failures, but we can still get a satellite up there. And Eisenhower said, no, I'm not going to let you do it, because he had had problems with Khrushchev, and he said, Khrushchev would say right away that we were putting up a spy satellite, which is exactly what it would have been. So Eisenhower will not let them move forward. Well, the Russians put up their satellite, Sputnik, which all it did was fly around and beep, as far as we know. I don't think they had the technology to make a satellite, a spy satellite, like we did, even then, in those times. But when they put Sputnik up, everybody was saying, oh, woe is me, woe is me. The Russians are ahead of us. Eisenhower was delighted, secretly delighted, because now we could go ahead and put our satellite up, a spy satellite, and we could start doing that. The Russians had opened the door for us to do it, and Eisenhower was happy. He didn't show that he was happy, but he secretly was delighted. The Brookings report, if I remember correctly, was ordered. I can't remember. I don't know.
1960 right now.
Yeah, was it ordered by? I guess just the military ordered it. I don't know that it was a particular branch that ordered it. But the bottom line is, as far as I know, the bottom line of it is, and says that if extraterrestrial life was discovered and given to the public, there would be mass turmoil. Religion would be attacked. All sorts of bad social happenings would occur. As I recall, that was the meat of the Brookings report. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. Things could get as bad as 2020 back then, I guess. That was their biggest fear.
Yeah. I don't know. I personally, my view of it is, if disclosure of some type was made soon, I think people would say, gee, that's interesting, and then go on about their business. I don't think it. Yeah. I don't think it would harm religion at all. And I've blown hot and cold on what I think the government knows and what it doesn't know. I still believe that some part deep within our government Majestic 12 type outfit, if you will, exists. They're the ones that have the debris from crashed extraterrestrial vehicles. They're the ones that control that, and no matter how many stars you have, or the fact that you're president of the United States, you don't have a need to know. If you don't have a need to know, you don't know. Truman knew everything. It was Truman's intent to have everything pertaining to this subject, the subject of flying saucers, which is what they were called in, to come directly through the office and be controlled by the office of the president. That's why I believe he set up Majestic 12. I think Eisenhower, JFK wanted to know. We know that he contacted both the CIA and NASA he wanted all of our files on the UFO subject to be turned over to the Soviets and have the Soviets turn over to us what they had. The reason being, his logic there was, they had some bad experiences of seeing objects on radar flying at very, very high speeds. And I think we went on alert one time because of these objects, and the Soviets may have also. And that worried Kennedy a great deal. That's why he wanted to share information with the Soviets and have them share with us, so that a mistake, a nuclear conflict mistake could be avoided. Some people say that's why he was killed. Well, Hoover complained about the Air Force or the Navy grabbed it before we could even have a look at it. Something to that effect. That's a paraphrase. But yeah, Hoover was upset about it, because I think the FBI was in most cases were being kept out of the loop. The cooperation between the Air Force and the CIA, I think that became rocky at various times. The Navy, as we talked about earlier, they just stayed out of the fracas. The Office of Naval Intelligence is extremely good, and so the way I view them, that they just put themselves above the whole fracas going on.